What if I could show you a way to improve your company's potential talent pool, attract the best of the best talent available? And if that's not enough for you, how about we throw in the potential to better relate and win over diverse customers? Interested? Well, let's have ourselves a pocket sized pep talk because there's a simple solution, but it requires embracing a diverse, equitable, and inclusive work culture. Unsure how to do that? Well, you're in the right place because I've got not one but two authors here to walk you through how to create this type of inclusive work culture with a practical, leader friendly framework and daily practices that will provide you with the tools you need.
A Pocket Sized Pep Talk, the podcast that can help energize your business and your life with a quick, inspiring message. Now, here's your host, Rob Jollis.
Today's guests, Jonathan Stutz and Eddie Pate, have a combined 50 years of experience working in leading edge companies such as Amazon, Microsoft, and Starbucks. Today, each has their own consulting practice and are active leaders in the community, serving on the board of trustees for several nonprofit organizations in the Seattle area. Jonathan earned his master's in organizational leadership from City University of Seattle, while Eddie has a PhD in sociology from the University of Washington. They are the co-authors of the new book, Daily Practices of Inclusive Leaders, a guide to building a culture of belonging, recently published by my favorite publisher, Barrett Kohler. Happy to have you with us and welcome to the show, Eddie and Jonathan.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Rob,
Yep.
thank you. I love the introduction. You are good at this, my friend. Appreciate it.
Good. Well, we got some work ahead of us, but I sure appreciate that. And I want to tell everybody who's listening and walking that dog right now, I've given these guys special permission to talk right over each other. So get ready because we're not going to be polite here. We're going to get it done. All right. Listen, it's good to have you here. I want to come out of the gate with kind of a nutty question, but I want to know what it's like writing a book with another writer. Was there a process you followed, or did you just kind of fall into that? How did that work?
Yeah, I can go first, and Eddie, jump in anytime, like Rob said. We definitely set up a system up front to help us be successful. We first of all, we talked to another Barrett Kohler author, Bill Price, whose book, The Frictionless Organization, is also out. And Bill has a lot of experience writing books with a co-author. He has written three books actually with a co-author. So we first leaned on Bill and got his advice on the process and how to go about that, how to work together. And we kind of set up this system where we looked at the chapters after we built the outline of what chapters we each wanted to write, which we were most passionate about. And so we had a clean split on the chapters, and then we each wrote, and then we handed each other off each other's work for the other one to look at and give feedback. But then the really genius idea that Barrett Kohler came up with is they suggested we work with a writing development coach. And so we ended up bringing on Danielle Goodman to help us. And she's with the Good Editing. And she was fabulous. She helped us work through our different writing styles and organization of the book and putting content in the right place. And when there were challenges, she was a good middle person to help us out and working through some of those challenges, because we have different experiences, different lived experiences, come from different places. And so it was super helpful to have Danielle.
Yeah, I think that almost covers it all. I had written down right when you asked that question, I had written Danielle Goodman's name down. So I'm glad Jonathan mentioned her, because the valuable piece that she did for us, as he mentioned, was the fact that she was able to merge two voices that were very different into one coherent voice that I think comes out in the book, which I thought was really good. But here's something, Rob, that I didn't realize the value she would bring. And it wasn't just editing and merging our voices, but what she was able to do, which was incredible, is to take the flow of writing, which we did, that we were locked into, and say, think about what if you put this here and you put this here, and what if you take this section and add it here. And then when she would do this, it was almost as if the sun came out and parted, and you're going, oh, that is a beautiful thing in terms of how she made that flow. So I thought that part was really very good. Another piece that I'll add to what Jonathan talked about is, I think we both were willing to push back when we needed to push back on sections and pieces we thought something needed to be added, something needed to be tweaked. And I thought that was a really strong illustration, if you will, on diverse perspectives driving the creation of something that was even more innovative and creative because of that kind of willingness to say, yeah, you know what, that's not good enough. I think this is what else we need to do, or that's really good. Here's an idea that might work with that. So I think that was part of the process too, is having that kind of agreement that that's what we'd be willing to do. So
yeah, for sure. And in fact, I think one of the things we've overlooked is the fact that we had worked together for about 4 years and we came from the same cloth as far as corporate experiences. And so we had a foundation which we were able to be very open and candid with each other, very transparent. So there was no holding back when we had feedback for each other. We were able to be very open and candid so that we could work through those differences for sure.
Yeah. Almost like athletes, after 4 years, you kind of know where where to put the puck, where the other guy's going to be before he's there.
Right.
The Gretzky line.
Right.
Exactly.
And I'm glad that, I really think this is a valuable part of the conversation right now, because it's not that everybody's going to team up with another author, but you, in a sense, had an authenticity coach, somebody that was really, this your first book for you guys?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So for people who are listening, who have that dream, who want to write the book, I'm not so sure. Sometimes I think an editor almost gets in the way. You are like a racehorse. Put the blinders on and run that track. That's your job. But to have somebody look at it and say, you guys just keep running. Don't look around. Don't edit.
Right.
But I'm going to check your voice. I'm going to, I got you covered. When you get and work with a publisher, typically they'll turn it over to a copy editor. So we don't really need a copy editor. We need somebody to just listen to our voice. And that's what you guys did. But we don't have to be two. We can even be one and do that.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Mm-hmm. No, agreed 100%. And I think the analogy you're using that she allowed us just to run at 100 miles per hour and do this because she was going to be the one who was going to make sure that, we weren't missing pieces along the way, or if we had to take a side route, slow down for a second, she was the one who pulled and reined us in. And that was the project management piece of it. So I would recommend 100%, unless you're a really seasoned professional writer and you're writing your 10th book or something like that. I can't imagine writing a book without having someone like Danielle Goodman, and I would recommend anyone in our position to have someone like that. It's going to make their job getting the book across the finish line so much, I think, easier and real.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I'll leave it at this, but I will tell you that and I mentor a bunch of authors, for 99 out of 100 authors, I'm going to make that stat up, but I'm telling you, I'm close. 99% of the time when somebody wants to write a book, they fail because they keep self-editing as they go. They can't get out of the first chapter.
Yeah. Let it go.
No, you gotta go. You gotta go. Done is perfect. You gotta go. But it's certainly nice having somebody say, "Go! I got you back. Keep going."
Yeah, no, and good. Rob, similar to your one of the most recent podcasts you did, the Pocket Sized podcast, about that piece about imperfection. Yeah. We were able to just go and not try and be perfect, because we knew she had our back, and we also knew that we were each looking at each other's work, so we could just go and not worry about trying to be perfect.
Outstanding. Yep. I'm telling you, folks, hold on to that thought. Let's keep going. I've always wanted to, and I may still do this, I've always wanted to create a podcast called A Book Finds You, because a lot of times you're going to hear the question, how did you find this book? But in reality, it kind of finds us. So my question to you guys is, how did this one find you? Eddie, why don't we start with you? Jonathan, you bring up the rear.
Great. Yeah, no, absolutely. And there are two parts to my response on that. Well, the book found us it was years of having a working relationship where we constantly talked about, we should write together. We should do this. I'm thinking about writing. He's thinking about writing. I've had that similar conversation with other people who worked for me when I led efforts at Amazon's worldwide operations, and I had discussions. And so the book kind of just kept creeping. And finally, Jonathan had such a good connection and contact with BK Publisher, and had some discussions with Bill Price. And so all of a sudden the book found us that hey, we have a publisher, we've talked about this, we have this idea, we work together, so it found us, right? But so I think that is one way that the book found us,
Mhm.
and we ended up doing that, right? So I think that was good. Jonathan, do you want to add before I go?
Yeah,
Or?
I mean, for me, it was this was a evolution over many, many years. I've been studying leaders and leadership for most of my life. I was a poli-sci major out of the University of Washington for undergrad. And then I went back for a master's in 2013 on organizational leadership. And I merged two ideas, which studying leadership and then growing up watching The Wizard of Oz on Thanksgiving with my family. And it kind of came to me over time that leadership is this combination of heart, courage, and wisdom, and a belief in yourself, and a belief in a common dream for a common vision for the team while achieving each individual's aspirations and goals. So that became the background for the master's thesis, which was The Yellow Brick Road of Leadership, which I thought had the bones to be a book. And then talking to and working with Eddie, he'd been working with and developing over his whole career this 7 insights of inclusive leadership, which became chapter 2 in the wisdom that we've of the that wisdom chapter, Bailey Wisdom. And so bringing those two together seemed like a natural combination. And then the work we did in the training of these daily practices became the second half of the book of like, how do you implement this? A lot of books out there on strategy and on the business case for diversity, and even, like the why and the how, but not necessarily telling you on a day-to-day basis how leaders should behave. What are the little intentional steps they can take to create this culture of belonging? So it kind of brought all these things together over many years that actually came to fruition with the book.
The way I tie this off is, and this was the other point I was going to make, and is what was interesting is Neil Mallet, who you know from BK Publishing.
It's my editor.
Yeah, exactly. So everything Jonathan just talked about, and I said in response to your question, what Neil helped us do, and when you say how did the book find us, our initial idea was to write about inclusive leadership kind of broadly, and Neil helped us really zero in on the topic of, well, there are a lot of inclusive leadership books out there. Here's the experience you brought. You guys always talk about these small pebbles that cause ripples, which cause someone else to drop a pebble, which causes ripples, all these small daily practices that lead to systemic and cultural change. Why don't we zero in on this? So the book really literally found us, I think, because of Neil Mallet's guidance and giving credit where credit's due. He really sharpened our focus in on saying, this is a niche in the inclusive leadership market that's missing, and you do it. So why don't we talk about it? So I think that's the piece that I wanted to add, and it does flow in pretty well with what Jonathan said. So sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there, Rob.
Yeah. The challenge for guys like us is we've been doing this for so many years that we want to put everything we know into a book. And what Neil helped us understand was that that's not what's going to sell. That's not what people want to hear. It's that nugget. And so we worked with him literally for 4 months, going back and forth on our proposal. And he, like as Eddie said, he helped us find that nugget, which was these daily practices, and to really hone in and zero in on that.
Well, we got another lesson here that we can highlight, and I'm going to tell you that the one of the first books I wrote, and I don't talk about my books and titles, so I'm not even going to get the title, but I'm going to tell you I did not have a great editor. I threw the kitchen sink at it, including implementation, which is not going to get lost on this podcast, because that's one of the things that really stood out to me about your book. And we're going to highlight it in a minute, because just like as a trainer, I can teach you, but if you're not implementing what I'm teaching you, I'm wasting your time. Right. But I threw in an implementation piece, a really nice section. It was about a quarter of the book, but it's in the back of a very big book, and it got lost. And because I didn't have a smart editor. So the piece that I want to just highlight real fast is how people don't understand really how important an editor is and what really they do. People think an editor is kind of a copy editor, basically checking our grammar and syntax. That's not it. A great editor does exactly what you just described. They've seen hundreds of books. They can take what we're the subject matter experts, but they can rein it in and expand and contract, and they know what an audience needs. And that's so valuable. And unfortunately, it's not found. It's not that, they're hybrid publishers or self-publishers. They're wonderful opportunities. People think that they're missing distribution or something like that. They are. But the biggest thing we miss when we don't go with a conventional publisher is a real editor. And that's what a Neil Mallet is. And there's a few of them out there that are really helpful. So you just highlighted it. I want people to hear it. That's what you're looking for when you're going for a book deal. I'm going to tell you right now, the book deals are pretty much all the same on paper. You're looking for a great editor. You get that, you got a good book deal.
Yeah, no, I agree 100%. And Neil Mallet did this for us too, but also Danielle Goodman did it. And what you, Rob, what you were just talking about reminded me of this piece of it as well. Doing ID&E work, inclusion, diversity, and equity work, as we call it, instead of DEI, we say ID&E. When you do ID&E work and you write about it, and you realize quickly that since you're dealing with humans and people and emotions and behavior and everything, it's complex and it's nuanced. And you can't, it's very rare that you can overlay a framework and get all swaths of people across gender and race and age and disability and veteran stat, blah, 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 all these things. It's very nuanced. And what Neil was able to help us with the initial idea, and then Danielle Goodman was able to help us with throughout the entire book to the finished product, was how do you take complexity and nuance and write it in a way that people can digest it simply and understand it. And that's been the coolest feedback I've gotten from people. And in fact, from people who I truly respect as ID&E thinkers have said to me, you've been able to take this complex issue and simplify it and write about it in a way where I could follow every piece of it. And that was cool. So that's, I think what you just said to me is what, that sparked this kind of this piece, complexity, nuance, and simplicity, which was a very cool thing having that.
Yeah. Look, people come up sometimes when I'm doing a workshop, and they'll say, I've learned all this before. I think I've heard it all before. And I don't always say it out loud because I think it would come out as smug. But what I want to say is, yeah, but you didn't hear it as simply as I just presented it. Because when I can make it simple, you can implement it. And really the difference between a writer or a presenter is not that we've come up with this brand new idea. We've learned how to say it so it sticks. We've learned how to say, economize the words so that it reads. And that's really it. It's not that we invented the word diversity. We invented a way for people to be able to actually learn from it and apply it. And that's what makes a great writer.
Yeah, absolutely. They can visualize themselves in it. And
all right, I'm going to play the role of a publisher right now, because the publisher always asks the same question. When they're looking at a book and they're scratching their chin and they'll say, all right, let's see. We got inclusion, diversity, and equity. IDE, as these guys say. What makes this book different than the other books on this particular topic? All right,
Jonathan, you jump on this time since I was.
All right, yeah, Jonathan, you carry the load on this one.
Well, the thing that makes our book different from all the other books that are out there, and I've got to say first that there's been a lot of great work done in this space, and there's a lot of wonderful books that people can leverage and utilize, and we've utilized them, and we've learned from a lot of other practitioners that have gone before us. But what we wanted to find was, and I kind of alluded to this earlier, is that there isn't a book out there today that provides leaders with the practical, easy steps that they can implement. People often think that doing this work is a heavy load, that it's another huge lift on their already full plates. And the reality is that these are practices that people can implement as part of the rhythm of the business. As we say, as part of the employee life cycle. So the way we've organized, and this is how our book is different, is we've organized these daily practices by the employee life cycle, from recruiting to hiring to talent development, talent management, promotions, all through the cycle. And then the other thing we've done is that we have a whole chapter on how to overcome hurdles, right? So this is not just a book about inclusion, diversity, and equity. It's really, at a bigger picture, a book about change management. How do you evolve and change a culture over time? And when you're doing that, people resist change. And so we've leveraged our experience in doing change management over, like you said, a combined 50 years to give people not just like, what is the resistance you're going to face? What are the hurdles? But how do you overcome them? And we do it through storytelling. So that's a huge aspect. Another one is that we have a whole chapter on how to scale this, because our work is often underfunded, under-resourced. So we're leveraging human resources oftentimes. And so we talk about the human resource function as a partner for us and how they can help extend our work, because HR folks, this is not part of the full discipline of like compensation, benefits, et cetera. So people will assume they know how to do this work, but we want to help them grow and learn in the space to actually extend our work. That's all I'll say. And Eddie, may you want to talk about the profiles and the QR codes and all that too?
Yeah. That's part I would add. So a really unique feature, which was really interesting early on. Actually, my son Arthur approached me and said, "You know what? Use QR codes in your book, because that's how we like to digest learning and be able to go see a video or go to a list or do something." And so I approached Jonathan about it, and we both realized just kind of how brilliant that simple idea is. And then what we realized is, even now, if we were to update because the QR code takes you to our book website where we have a resource tab, we're able to constantly refresh and update the resource tab. In typical books, you might get a link to something or a link to a particular resource, but you can't expand it. Now we have a constantly refreshable book we could use and update our resources. And so that was one of the things that we did that I thought was just a real difference and a difference maker. Yeah. And in fact, my kids, Gen Z, millennial, friends and stuff, they point this out all the time. So our book speaks across generation and generational differences, which is really cool. The other thing that we've done is, and I think we ultimately came up with this idea where we were together down in Southern California, just walking and talking about the idea in the book, and we were trying to think about ways to make it different. And we came up with the idea of, why don't we have 4 or 5, maybe more leaders start out in the beginning of each of our chapters. We describe who they are and how they actually epitomize what we want to talk about in that particular chapter. And let's leverage our Rolodex, if you will, talk about a dated boomer term, right? And then identify some leaders who would epitomize. And so we've come up with some incredible leaders that we focus in the book. CEOs, talent acquisition professionals, just wonderful people that we have in the first 5 chapters of our book, setting the foundation of what inclusive leadership looks like. And we tell their story, and their stories epitomize what we were trying to point out in that chapter. And that's also a really unique thing. So there are a bunch of stuff, I think, like that we have in this book that makes it different.
I love the QR code, by the way. I took a note on that one. When you see me look away, I'm taking notes. That's a good sign, because I've heard it all. No, I haven't heard the QR code idea. That's a really good idea.
It's a good idea.
All right, we're gonna shift. We're gonna shift to some instruction here. All right, we're gonna do a little bit of teaching. So, all right, leaders are the key to inclusion. Now, you're not going to get an argument from me. But you also just mentioned that, and believe me, I make a career out of it, that people resist change. So, and change isn't easy. So in sales, we use the term whiff 'em. What's in it for me? Okay. Mm-hmm. Let's talk for a moment to leaders that are listening that say, all right, maybe I'm not the best, but I know how it works. I don't want to get into something. This scares me a little bit. What is a whiff 'em? Give me a couple, what's in it for these leaders to not just read your book, but to adopt, a diversity mentality and, basically go at this and stop being so afraid of it.
Right. And so I'll jump on, and I'll do a very practical piece, and I'll do kind of a conceptual piece.
Okay.
The practical piece that I think leaders, the WIFM for leaders who really want to do inclusion, diversity, and equity work, who really want to have an impact, who really want to get the best out of their organizations. I think the problem with some of the traditional approaches to doing ID&E and give me 2 or 3 big things I can do and I can do anything, leaders are afraid of doing that because they don't have the time. So the approach that we do with the daily practices, dropping a pebble, which causes a ripple, which ultimately leads to systemic and cultural change, to highly effective work teams and all that stuff, it's not overwhelming. So the with them for them is they're able to get really good ID&E work done. They leverage their teams in a way that's super positive, and it doesn't take up big swaths of their time. So the with them for them is that it can have an effective tool, and they're not going to be overwhelmed. So I think that's one of the pieces for this. The conceptual piece that we tell leaders all the time, and Jonathan and I, whenever we speak, we ultimately always talk about this, is if you are truly able to leverage the differences and similarities that people bring to your teams in an effective way, you're going to be more creative and innovative in how you do your work, period, for your customers, the solutions you make, for even development of your team. So the more that you can actually draw the strengths that people bring to the table in a way that is effective. And that's not always simple. With diversity, there's rub. But the skill in managing the rub to get the kind of creativity out of it, it results in just incredible outcomes. And so that's the with them for them. And then they start, and then with the beauty of the whole business case rationale that I kind of laid out there, not the whole, but that piece of it, is there are pieces that start coming off of that benefit. You start seeing better engagement scores. So you start thinking about employee engagement going through the roof. And when you have employees feeling really engaged because you know how to manage them and lead them in an inclusive way and get that skill and that beauty out of them, they want to be on your team. They want to recommend your team. They don't want to tread out and leave the company or jump to different team, which then now you start over again and have to build for that role. So you start seeing those kinds of things, right? You do start seeing less attrition, and then you have less costs associated with that. And then you start seeing other leaders wanting to find out what your solution is, and and wanting to talk with you about it. And so then you start seeing your own personal brand and as a leader become bigger in a company, because as we talk about it, your leadership shadow just gets bigger and bigger, and you're able to hover in and impress and do more. So that's what I would say to leaders is if you want to energize your team, learn to do daily practices and ID the way we want you to. If you want to energize your function and your organization, your career, these are all WIFMs for them. I think it's a no-brainer. Jonathan, I don't know. That's how I would think about that question.
Yeah. And I would only add that, what Eddie's just said so well is it nets down to, this is a business issue. Inclusion, diversity, and equity is a business strategy, because all leaders, they're trying to create high performance, highly effective teams. And if you think about it, we have people from all over the world working in the workforce today. We're doing business globally, and we're dealing with some of the most challenging, complex problems. You think about artificial intelligence, you think about climate change, and we need all hands on deck. And for all hands to be on deck, we need all those hands to be heard and seen and valued and understood. So creating this, when leaders are inclusive and demonstrate empathy for their employees, they're creating a culture over time where people feel they belong. And when people feel they belong, they're more willing to be creative and take risks, just as Eddie said, and create that innovation that we need to solve these problems. Because the problems we're facing are what they call adaptive learning problems. No one person has the answer. So we need that diversity of perspective and ideas globally to solve these super challenging problems. And that's where the leaders win, because, and we always say, everyone wins with inclusion, diversity, and equity. And there's a lot of pushback today, Rob, as I'm sure you know, on this piece that people call DEI. And the reason there's this pushback is because they've kind of hijacked the narrative, because they've positioned it as, if a person of color or a person who's marginalized or oppressed wins or gets a job, then somebody else loses. So white man may not be getting the job. That's not what it's about. It's never been what it's about. It's about building these teams where everybody feels that they're getting what they need in order to be successful, where resources are distributed in a way that everyone is able to achieve their own personal goals and aspirations, so the organization can then be ultimately successful.
Yeah, and Robin, what Jonathan is saying is, it's in a good phrase for your audience is, it's not a zero-sum game. the pie gets bigger when the work is done as Jonathan described it, and I think that's a real important piece. And then the final piece that I'll add is we're allowed to speak over each other a little bit. So the other piece that I would add, and it is definitely about creating highly effective work teams. And I think ultimately the goal, though, is for the aggregation of those highly effective work teams and the work that comes out of to create structures, processes, policies, mechanisms that create the kind of inclusive workplace that everyone can be successful. So by doing this work, a leader is going to benefit by creating that highly effective work team. But the most important piece of it in my mind is it actually bleeds into the effectiveness of an organization. So if you want to have the kinds of companies that are highly effective writ large, you do ID&E work. And then that's another benefit to those leaders, another WIFM, because they're going to benefit from the equity of their stock or the amount that people are able to make. So everyone benefits when this work is done right.
All right. I'm gonna teach you guys to sell later on. That's 19 WIFMs you just gave me. There's folks, in other words, there's plenty of reasons where, and Gordon Gekko from Wall Street years ago gave that great speech, greed is good. People always misunderstood that. Well, it was Gordon Gekko and they were making a certain point. I really don't think that that's a misused phrase. In other words, when we talk about a WIFM, if you're a company and you're really saying, hey, we're about profit, we're about, doing the best for our customer, et cetera, I want you to be greedy. Those are the kind of customers that the three of us are looking to consult with. I want you to want the best. So if you're really feeling that way, you just heard reasons that absolutely apply to the bottom line and improve the organization. And there are a handful of other ones as well. The book is called Daily Practices of Inclusive Leaders, A Guide to Building a Culture of Belonging. Came out in May, I believe. I looked it up.
28th, yep.
A few dozen reviews, but we need to get a few more on there. So but this audience knows that when they buy books, they don't just buy them, they read them and they review them. That's an order. You guys don't have to talk about it. I'm doing it for you. Really, just as a reminder, it's one of the kindest things you can do for another human being who's written a book and put their heart and soul into it, and an editor behind them. So go all the way, folks. Get the book, great. Read the book, better. Implement the book, even better. And take 20 seconds and write 2 sentences and tell people what your experience was. It means a lot to these authors. All right, let's keep pushing forward. I don't think that people wake up and consciously decide, I'm going to be insensitive, I'm going to be malicious today, and yet we make mistakes. But this is how I live my life. I really, even when somebody gets me, I don't think it was malicious. I think it's misguided. I just don't want to think that about my fellow human being. So let's think that way for a moment. I don't think leaders are trying to be malicious, but give me 1 or 2 classic mistakes. In training, we call this unconscious incompetency. We don't know that we don't know. And I'll tell you what, 1 for each year, all right? Give me 1 classic mistake. Jonathan, we'll start with you, that a leader might make and they have no idea that they're making this mistake.
Well, I think there's a tendency to, we all spend time with people that are more like ourselves. We tend to trust people faster, that people remind us of ourselves, maybe a younger version of ourselves. So I think in meetings, people will oftentimes lean towards getting feedback or input from the people that they are most similar to. So they're going to oftentimes hear something that they already agree with, but the mistake they make is not going to the person who's maybe different from them, has a different background or experience, or may tell them something very different than what they want to hear, but is speaking truth to that leader, that leader needs to see their blind spots. And like you said earlier, we have these blinders and they cause stereotypes, they can cause the subconscious bias, they can cause, just as a result of like cultural incompetency, just not being culturally sensitive. So I think that's the one I would share, is that just listen to people that are going to give you a different perspective to make you think differently, and be humble enough to listen. and hear and really try and understand what that person's perspective is from their lived experience.
So, and that was more than one, just so you know, Rob. He rolled out a whole bunch of things right there. That was more than one.
So Eddie, counting.
As I was on my list going, okay, nope, he said ethnocentrism. Okay, no, he did cultural competence. He took those off. All right. So so I'll give you another one that is a real practical one that I think people often miss out on, and they make the mistakes with is we also introduce, not only do we introduce who's in your kitchen, the kind of thing that Jonathan just talked about, that who surrounds you is really important. But here's a simple one. I think leaders make a mistake of not understanding the intent versus impact quotient, and that oftentimes your intent does not equal your impact, whether you're talking to individuals, groups, organizations or not. And then they don't realize that what causes that. So if you think of intent and impact as an equation and you have an equal sign with a red line through it because the intent doesn't equal impact, what drives that red line through that equal sign is cultural differences, language differences, accent differences, all these kind of differences that leaders, we encourage you to become more culturally competent and aware of how you show up in a particular place, driven by who you are and who you're interacting with. And a simple communications thing, a simple example that they use that's too US centric, or if they say something that is too colloquial for the East Coast and even people on the West Coast don't get it, or you say something that you use some type of phrase to make your big point and people are sitting in the audience staring at you and you're wondering like, why are they, everyone should be clapping and excited about that, right? It's not understanding intent versus impact quotient. And that is a major, as simple as that is, Rob, as simple as that is a major reason for why you see stuff go off track and not have the kind of impact you want. Simple intent versus impact is what I would add to Jonathan's list.
Yep. And that's what I mean in terms of see how you begin to control your topic a little bit. That's very easy for us to remember. It's a complicated piece you just put in about a sentence and a half, and one that we can remember. I like it. And I back down to you, Jonathan. While you were talking, I was thinking about how simple, and we just mentioned the word just listen. It's really important to just listen. Yeah. I remember a manager telling me once in his own words, slightly different, but I'll use mine. Listen to understand and not refute. Sometimes we're just sitting there and we look like we're listening, but we're working on our counter proposal of ideas. Just listen. It takes work. It's discipline. You really have to kind of just clear and listen. Be shocked at what you hear. But I wish people would just stop trying to come up with a counter argument and just simply listen. Mm-hmm. By the way, sometimes I'll actually tell people, let's swap sides. Okay. Now you do you tell me my story and I'm going to tell you yours. But I do it before we start, and you'll see people really leaning in because now they got to understand what I'm saying because they're going to be saying it in a moment. And but it's tough. I just don't want to run through that stop sign. It's that important. I really believe that. All right, we're coming down the home stretch. But I told you I wanted to hold a question for you because I really wanted to give it some breath. I'm so jealous of the fact that you really got your implementation piece out there. I think it's although I'm a young fella, I really, if I could go back some years, I would be in my ear about it. It's all about implementation. What are you doing to help these people implement? Where are the job aids? How are we training them? How are we going to make this stick? And so I know that your book provides actions, activities, tactics to help these leaders out. Let's go one and one again. Eddie, I'll start with you, and you can sneak a couple extra in to stick it to Jonathan if you need to.
Well, that's what Jonathan does. So you say, right, Jonathan, give me one or two if he gives me 12, but that's okay. That's all right.
Give me one or two, examples of an activity or something where if I'm reading the book, here's something you could do tomorrow to and maybe it's a job aid, but something to help this stick a little bit.
Yeah, I'll give you a couple, and
Okay.
one I like is very practical. We didn't make this concept up. This is something that I was working with another consultant who was in Europe, and she introduced me to the notion of a pause button. And the pause button has such profound implications in meetings where you're dealing with talent management, employee evaluation, deciding on talent. So, what the pause button is a simple, agreed upon process that, let's say, Rob, you and Jonathan and I are in a meeting and we're having this discussion, and Rob, you say something that just doesn't rub you well, or you were looking at data that is really surprising, and instead of moving on, like, that happens often where you don't say something in that very moment because it's uncomfortable or whatever, and you just move on. The pause button is something that you agree to. It's a process to say, hey, Rob, I'm gonna hit the pause button, and that gives you license to slow down, stop the conversation in a way that's comfortable, that takes any kind of leadership differences or power differences in the room, or the desire to get through something really fast. It gives everyone in the room that ability to say, I'm gonna hit the pause button because I think we're missing something here. What aren't we seeing? Why aren't we concerned with the fact that all the people on the list who are being managed out of the company are either Latina or African American? Does that bother you? Right. So the pause button is this tool that's super simple that you can implement now on any team meeting, on any kind of process, that just gives people that tool to slow things down so that you don't make mistakes. You don't have unconscious biases that are unchecked. So that's one, the pause button, super simple. The other one I really love is a conceptual one that you can turn into practicality. We talk about the notion of spending your privilege. And I don't know, Rob, if you've ever heard that expression, but I use this, and I've been talking about spending your privilege now for a couple of years. And people look at me and go, I have never really thought of it that way. And it's very practical to use. I'll give you an example. Let me back up a second. So spending your privilege is, we all have privilege in one form or another, right? And these privileges aren't necessarily complex. They're very simple things that you see in the mirror every day. Like the three of us see that we're men, and as men, we have certain privileges over women, in society. So how are we spending that simple privilege of being male to help women be successful in situations where their gender is a blocker, right? So in a meeting, something as practical as this is if, and women see this all the time in the workplace, where they're constantly cut off and they're not allowed to finish their ideas, and a man typically overruns what they're talking about. So if you spend your privilege in that moment and say, hey, Rob, hold on a second. So I hear you want to get in, but Sue was in the middle of talking, and I really want to finish hearing what she's offering, because it's brilliant. And then we'll get to you here in a second, but let's make sure that we can hear what Sue's talking about, and then let's decide on this, and then we'll have a discussion about it, and we'll move on to what you're saying. That simple action right there, that daily practice, that pebble that you drop, causes ripples in that meeting, because now Sue's able to get all her information out and potentially add super value to the team. Rob has learned a lesson that he needs to pay attention to that dynamic. And here's the beauty. Jonathan may be sitting there listening to this whole dynamic, and the next meeting he goes to, he does the same thing, and he stops someone from cutting someone off and uses the same dynamic. So pebble, ripple, pebble, ripple. And if you do that enough over time, you may create a culture of belonging where it's not acceptable to cut women off in meetings, because now you hear it said so much. So you can see the beauty and power of daily practices like the pause button or spending your privilege, as I described. Super simple and super effective.
Bang. Well done. All right, Jonathan.
I'm going to give you one.
Okay.
And just one. So one that I like that's very easy to implement is when you are interviewing candidates for positions in your company or organization, to ensure that you have diversity of interviewers. So oftentimes there's not a lot of thought put into making sure you have that diversity in the panel of folks interviewing candidates. But there's two benefits of it. One is you get that discussion after the interviews have occurred to get a different perspectives of folks from different experiences and backgrounds, race, gender, ability, all those things, sexual orientation, getting different people's feedback on the candidate. The other side of it is if you have a candidate who comes from a historically underestimated, marginalized, or oppressed group, if they see somebody like themselves on the panel of interviewers, they're going to feel more connected to that company. They're going to feel like, there is diversity here. I'm going to fit in. This is an organization that I can see myself in. And they have an opportunity to feel a connection with someone who, at least on the visual dimensions of diversity, looks like them and has more in common. So that's an easy one to implement. It's great for the company. It's great for the candidates. And it sends a very positive message of inclusivity.
Perfect.
And Rob, just to add on top of that, and the beauty of what Jonathan just described is that if you follow through and you track the results of your interviews to see who comes to your company when you have diverse panels versus non-homogeneous panels, and you'll see the incredible benefits of doing something as simple as that. Statistics will show you that is how you increase diversity in your organizations and build the muscle around that as well. Don't you think, Jonathan?
Yeah, absolutely. You're going to have a higher acceptance rate on offers. And the other side of it is that candidate, whether they got the job or they didn't get the job, they're going to go out and tell their friends and colleagues and professionals about the experience they had. And to your point, Rob, about, we're all in sales to some degree, they're going to go out and talk positively about the company, whether that's a customer or a potential candidate down the road, that they had a positive interviewing experience with that company and they saw people like themselves on the panel of interviewers. So it's got a kind of a synergistic effect.
Pebble, ripple, pebble, ripple.
I think I'm gonna have a nightmare about pebbles and ripples tonight, but okay. All right, pebble, ripple, pebble, ripple. Listen, outstanding. The book is called Daily Practices of Inclusive Leaders, A Guide to Building a Culture of Belonging. You can hear that once we open the spigot of Whiffums, it's almost impossible to turn it off. There's just way too much value in this conversation. And I like the fact we've got a fresh look at it. And I love the fact that we have implementation tools to not just hear about it and be inspired by it and be motivated and maybe informed. Who knows? Looking at you two guys, maybe entertained a little bit, but implement it. And even these last couple of ideas, I never even thought about how important what that panel is comprised of. And yet there it is, very simple, though that's what writers and authors and speakers do. So I applaud you. And, it was fun talking to you guys because we actually did two things. We got a couple of good ideas out there for those who are thinking about writing books. And then we turned for home and we didn't just hear about your book. We got some real practical ideas and tools from it. So I'm grateful for both of you. How do people get a hold of you? And let's start with Jonathan. Okay.
Yeah. No, I wasn't going to jump in first. So the website is inclusivepebbles.com, all one word, inclusivepebbles.com. Okay. There's more pebbles for you, Rob, to have a nightmare with. And there's resources, videos. But the really cool thing about that website, Rob, is that there's a tab, and this was a great idea of Eddie's, was a tab on the website called It Takes a Village. And we really wanted to be intentional about walking the talk about diversity. So when you go to the It Takes a Village tab, you'll see quick little short bios on all the people from Neil Mallet to Danielle Goodman to Eddie's son to my daughter. Anybody who contributed to the book has a little short profile on there. So that's a cool little difference that we also made in our website, inclusivepebbles.com.
Very inclusive. Yeah. That's a nice touch. Eddie, you want to throw anything on there?
No, all I would say is, and both Jonathan and I also have our own individual, boutique consulting companies. So, you can get a hold of me at eddiepate-speaking.com. And I'd love to come in and speak and train and do fireside chats and everything. So you can get a hold of us that way. And so come find us through our website, our book website, or my website, or Jonathan's website, which is
globaldiversitypartners.net.
Perfect.
There you go.
And I'll have all this up on our site as well. And sometimes the smartest place to start out, if you get confused, everybody, just go to LinkedIn and look these two guys up. And once you get linked up, you're good to go. Daily Practices of Inclusive Leaders, A Guide to Building a Culture of Belonging. Let's go get that. And let's do more than read it. Let's implement. These guys are there to help you. Can't thank you enough for being on the show. Really grateful. Wrote down a few thoughts of my own, and I'm not messing around when I say this. I always turn down books that are sent to me. because if I like them, you can't get a verified review from me. But when I like a book, I go get it. I'm getting this book, and you'll see a review of mine up there in a couple of weeks. I'm just backed up a little bit, but hold me to it. If you don't see it in 2 weeks, shame on me.
All right, Rob.
I'll have it up there, boys. All right.
Thank you, sir.
All right. Wonderful having you. Thanks so much for being on the show.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
You bet. Well, we'll do it again as well as we can next time, everybody. Until then, stay safe.
Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, please rate and recommend it on iTunes, Outcast, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also get more information on this show and Rob at jollis.com.